My name is Adam Book. I'm one of the cloud team leads from here at OpenSpan, and I don't really do Twitter or anything like that, but if you like, you can try to find me on LinkedIn. Let's talk once again about what used to be out there. Each service team, each service or team made their own set of tools, and they were allowed to write these in their own languages. So some were written in Java, some were written in Ruby, and I think one or two were actually written in Python. And then each tool actually required its own credential file. So no matter where you kept your tools, you would actually have to put your set of AWS credentials and make a call to it for your AWS credentials that you had for the account that you were going to use to credentialize that. And it was usually your key. It wasn't a username or password, but it was that set of hashes that you would use to for your user. With the new CLI, everything has, for most of the services have now been incorporated in the new CLI, and they're adding more services as they go through. But here's some of the available services from the new AWS CLI, which include EC2, IAM, auto-scaling as just a service in and of itself, DynamoDB, RDS, SES, Redshift, Route 53, Elastic IP addresses, and a whole lot more. When you start talking about passwords, credentials, and things like this becomes important because you're not going to have to, especially as you go into instance roles. This means as you spin up nodes and instances, you don't have to store your credentials onto a node and place it onto a node where it could actually become compromised. Here's the first way of how would you install the AWS CLI on a Windows machine. Oops, I skipped a slide there. Oh, something happened to my side. Something happened to my slide on that one. Installing on Windows, what you're going to do is you're going to use the MSI to install. They have a 64-bit or 32-bit MSI, which you can download right from AWS. And at that point in time, it should just install by itself, and then you can use from the Windows command interface. I apologize for that. I had these URLs right there for everybody to just go to. Installing on Linux, you're going to need Python 2.63 or later. You can just, from your command line, do Python -- version to make sure you have the most up-to-date, you have at least the prerequisites for Python. Then you can do sudo apt-get if you're on a Debian-based installation like Ubuntu, or yum install python pip, because pip is going to be your installer to install the CLI. Once pip is installed, then you can do python install AWS CLI. And the best part about using pip is you can actually upgrade once they put out a new upgrade for the CLI. Once your installation has been complete, you can then simply type AWS help, and then it will give you a list of commands. You can also do a AWS/H, and it will give you a list of the available services that you can then do for each. You can use the AWS command to go through. And I'm going to go through some examples here. Next is adding a matter of credentials. You can credential your AWS command line tool in a couple of different ways. If you have previous versions of the tool, the new CLI is actually smart enough to go out and find the credentials that you have previously. You can also declare credentials. So you can tell it to, you can go through the setup and actually put in your credentials that you want. And then you can also use an IAM instance profile. I think using the instance profile is the most important thing, is because if you've set your role permissions from IAM, then you don't have to use the permissions. You can tell an EC2 instance that it has permissions to use SES and send email, or it has permissions to grab items for a particular S3 bucket, and then you would never have to put in a credential into the AWS tool or the CLI tool.
For those of you doing things like Jenkins, you definitely want to do that on an AWS box with the role. That way you don't have to have the keys in your jobs and your Jenkins environment and printed in all your output of your jobs. Much better to have it in roles.
Right, especially if you're doing Jenkins from a cloud-based instance versus a in-house based instance, because if the Jenkins is doing a lot of, I'd say, authorized items, and then that Jenkins box gets compromised, then whoever goes in that Jenkins box has the run of the and has your keys that can then have the run of your accounts with those keys.
And users can do the same thing, right?
Right.
Anybody who's got access to your Jenkins can go look at all the output and use those keys any way they like.
And that goes into one of the top 10 SANS violations of actually putting the credentials along with the code as you check things into. So actually adding the credentials into the CLI tool. So what you would, after you've installed, you would just type AWS configure, and you would get an output like this. And so you would add after you type AWS configure, you're going to get a call, and you can add an AWS key ID, and that would be your key. And then it'd be ask you for an AWS secret key, and then you would cut and paste or hand type in, which I wouldn't say to do, and you put your access key ID. The next two are actually optional, so you can just click through, but if you want to put your region name that you're using, you can then declare one of the, I think it's about 7 regions now, and then your default output format, either JSON, or I think can you do text, like the old tools? JSON is good if you're using another outputter like a Logstash or a Splunk. That way you can capture those outputs and then shoot it back down to a logger, or a centralized logger. Something else that's new in the new AWS CLI is you can actually have multiple accounts, whereas the old tools you can only have one account. Now you can actually, in the new CLI, have multiple accounts and declare that when you're trying to do things. So if you have like a Jenkins and you have multiple accounts, like you have a beta, a dev, a beta, and a production, you can actually put all 3 credentials into that CLI and then call that at runtime. So you can actually go in and VI into your AWS config. The first one is going to be your default accounts, but then you could actually add a beta account with a different region or a different set of keys. Then we get back into the IAM instance roles. And so this is partly off of one of AWS's blog posts. And the IAM roles allow your applications in your EC2 instances to act on your behalf. And so whatever services you want that EC2 instance to have access to, you would then add those instances into the IAM role. And then, this is the important part, at runtime you have to declare the role. You can't add it later. You would have to kill that instance and then respin it up with the role. So you have to declare your IAM role at initiation time. And like IAM users, oops, I have a spelling typo there. You can use IAM policies to allow your EC2 instance access to specific AWS services. Like I said, like S3, like SES, like SQS, like permission to go to RDS, and then you don't have to add your credentials in there.
It's also worth noting, if you haven't messed with IAM roles too much, you can restrict those to specific resources in many cases. So if you wanted to bring up a box for a particular tool in a particular environment and only have access to the S3 bucket for that tool in that environment, you can specify that in the policies. So it's an easy way that you can lock down that, my BA instance of the tool can only talk to the BA bucket, and the QA tool can only talk to the QA bucket.
Or even just a particular document in that bucket.
Right.
We'll probably do at least one on IAM roles and profiles and things like that, because it gets pretty complicated, but it's very powerful as far as managing your users, your instances, and what people can and can't do. So here are some of the basic commands. Part 1. And the part 1 and 2 is going to be actually just working with EC2 instances. So this was one, and I took this from the old tools that I used to do and when I was looking for my instances. So I'd have all these instances, and you could kind of look at it on the screen, but a lot of times I used to do this through grep, but if I was trying to find the name of a particular instance ID or an instance, this is how you do it in the new CLI tool. So you'd use describe instances, and then instead of grep, you have these things called filters. And the filters you can use either name and the name of the filter would be instance ID, or in this one, I'm trying to find the actual ID of this instance. And then because I didn't declare which region I was in, I'd be in region US East 1. And when I work with EC2, I always have a lot of tag value pairs. So that the people that are in billing can say, well, this is for either customer, or this is I use a tag called phase, whether it's development or staging or production. So there's my value of phase, and then we can see the phase is testing. So we can quickly sort through those types of things. So once again, you'd have your name is your tag key, your value is phase, and then your tag value, and the value is testing. And once again, you need a region. If you don't have your default region defined when you set up your instance, then, and even if you do have a default region of US East 1, you can still then redeclare the region. If you want to copy an image from one region to another, you've created an AMI that you're happy with, and now you need to take that from the east over to west 2 so that you have some auto scaling or just some backup resiliency. Then you can do that quickly from the CLI by just using the EC2 copy image. And then you're just going to tell it your source image ID with the AMI, and then your source region, and then the region that you're copying to, and then the name that you're going to use it for. I use this line myself just in a Jenkins job. Once I've discovered once I've done and created the AMI that I needed, I can then push it right on over to the region that I need it to go to. And it's strictly automated. This is one I just added tonight after dealing with some problems. And how was I going to, in a production environment, take a backup of a database that had grown to a terabyte in size? Well, I did it with just EC2 create snapshot. The snapshot took all of 2 minutes. The Postgres dump took over 16 hours. I could take the snapshot of the volume. It took 5 hours to actually gel the snapshot, but still it's better than 16 hours and trying to figure out a time when people weren't actually going to be dealing with data.
Adam, where were you last Sunday? That's beautiful.
That's why I said you got to come into my group. There's once you have your snapshot, you can then spin up a new instance and attach just that snapshot up. So it doesn't matter that it's Postgres or MySQL or whatever. Your people can still be shooting down data. You take your snapshot, respin up to a new instance. And then you could also describe your spot history. If you're trying to save yourself some money and you need to know where to place your bid, you can describe the spot price history, what types of instance, and what type of region. So that's just a little scratching the surface of what you can do just on EC2. Now let's work with some S3 buckets. If you want to know in your region how to list which buckets you have, it's just an Amazon. Because before with the tools, all you had to work with was S3 CMD, which was a third-party tool that you had to actually, and it worked, but Amazon itself had no ability to actually work with S3. And Rob, I'm sure you use S3 CMD, right? Yeah, I mean, that's really all you had from the command line with S3. Now you have the ability from the AWS command line tools to actually work with S3 and do a lot of things with S3. If you want to list your buckets in a particular region, it's a simple ls, just like in Linux. Creating a bucket, Amazon S3 MB for make bucket, the name of the bucket and then the region you want the bucket to go into. Placing an object up into the bucket with server-side encryption, so you can actually encrypt the object as you place it up there. So you're going to copy the name of your file, the name of your bucket with a test file, -SSE, server-side encryption, and then the region. So you place it up into your bucket, it's already encrypted, it's already safe for your customer. Next, this comes from another problem that I faced, and inside of VPC, how was I going to send out mail when my servers were getting problems or issues, or I saw new files? And every time dealing with the mail server's IP address kept changing, and I had a ACL limit of 20 rules. And so I kept scanning the mail servers, I kept having to add new mail servers, and they kept dying. So how was I going to keep up with that? If you use the SES, and then contacting Amazon, I said, well, what's your SES addresses for your mail? Well, they say, well, we don't give those out. I said, well, how can I put that in there to my SES? They're like, well, maybe you ought to deal with some kind of proxy server. I said, well, where's the instructions to set that up? They're like, well, maybe I ought to just put the addresses into your ACL rules. So it was like left and right and trying to deal with this. So finally, I came up with sending emails with SES through the command line. And because we'd already done this in Ruby, and this would work, and because it's already authenticated and it doesn't have to go through all the ACL rules, this actually solved a problem that we had. So you do AWS SES, send email. It bypasses having to go through all the different ACL rules and security group rules. And then the problem with this is you have to have an approved email address, and then if you're going to send a bunch, it has to be out of the sandbox issue. So you have to contact AWS support to make sure that you're out of the sandbox area into a production sending account, and that you have an approved email address. And that's with, if you're sending, you have to have a confirmed email address. So SES send email from your from whatever address you're sending from. Then you can do a subject. We actually have these as some variables in our scripting. Who it's going to, once again, that can be a variable. And then the region it's being sent from. Okay, so sudo apt-get install Python. Okay, Python -s version. Okay, so sudo apt-get install Python pip. I'm going to do pip install AWS CLI. Now we should be able to do AWS help. No. Oh, sudo.
No, you missed your sudo on the install.
Oh, did I? It is. There we go. So there's all our commands available. there's all our commands available from just the CLI itself. Now we haven't credentialized it at all, so even if we try to do this, it wouldn't give us a lot back because this instance has no IAM role. So we could actually do, we could actually put some credentials in this one, but we could do AWS S3 LS, and it's going to come back and tell us that, yeah, we have no credentials. So we can do AWS configure and this was going to be.
And you're on camera. You probably don't want to print those to the screen.
No, I made one just for this, just for this group. I'm trying to. They'd only had. No, I was prepared to do a little demo for this. No, I'm not. I'm not going to give out. That's why when I went to switch over, and before I went to just California, I switched off to like my. Wherever it is when you go to IAM and you create your little, short URL that for your group and everything. I want to switch off to that for when I was down credentialing in, but yeah, actually let me find the credential file first, and then yeah, the credential file, I don't. There it is. There we go. So here's the credentials I'm going to use, and like I said, I made it just for this demo. I should have put my secret, my ID, and then my secret key in there, my region, like I'm in US-West-1, output format, I'll just put default, and now I should be able to go list, and there's all my buckets. So now I could once again do, and for some reason it gave me buckets inside of the east, which is so we can do AWS S3 MK or MB, and then the bucket name would be test1. Oh, S3 / AWS ATL test1. And so it made the bucket right there. And so then we could do the list, and we region US-West-1. Oh, it gave me everything for the global US. That's because S3 will see a lot of your buckets across the United States, as it's trying to globally do content delivery.
Bucket names are global, right?
Yeah, I think the bucket names,
Specific, so,
but you had to, when you make a bucket, you had to declare a region.
right.
And the content is regional versus the name versus regional being regional. What else? I gave this user access to EC2, SES, S3. Those are the 3 services I gave it access to. If anybody has some more questions about the CLI. But I at least want to show you how to actually install it and set it up in the demo. No? Then thank you very much.
It was just today we should ask.
Yeah, so tell me.